Hi, it's Tony Robbins here for another podcast, everyone. I'm really excited about this session because the man I'm going to introduce you to is a gentleman I've known for, I think about 15, 16 years. In fact, my son went to his church starting about 18 years ago called the Rock Church here in San Diego, which is where we are, just attended the service. But the real reason I wanted to meet is because he's also the author of The Third Option, Hope for a Racially Divided Nation. This man has lived what we're going to talk about today, and I don't think any of us need any coaching to understand where we are today as a society, where we seem to be magnifying our differences instead of connecting on the areas that really matter together. And, there's so much pain out there. There always has been. But I haven't seen many people talking about solutions. You watch the media and it's just more and more pain. I think it's part of that is the media today is not designed to inform us. It's designed to startle us, to get our attention. It's unfortunately a part of how economics occur for that type of business. And so I'm hoping that maybe there's a voice of reason here with a beautiful heart could really touch your heart today. And not that you are necessarily someone who's experiencing racism or have ever maybe said or done something that you didn't mean to that offended someone. But I think today we can maybe look at it with less judgment and really a deeper understanding of what's really behind it, because the issue is huge. If you're African American in this country, you're 3 times more likely to have your car searched when you're pulled over. If you have a white audience that's supposedly not racist in any way, just unconscious conditioning affects us all, whether we know it or not. And 13% of the time, that if it's an African American, they're going to have a 13% longer sentence, to give you an idea. I might give you a statistic. If you watch sports, I remember watching LeBron last year, and in the middle of the championship, here's this man, one of the most incredible athletes in the history of basketball, one of the most incredible athletes in the world, and he's got to deal with somebody putting the N-word on his mailbox at this day and age. And it's just, it's crazy and it's insane. And so maybe today we can bring a little voice of reason and maybe we can have a conversation about things that most people don't want to talk about. So, Miles McPherson, brother.
Hey, brother.
So good to see you.
Thanks for that intro. That was awesome.
No, you're awesome. I was absorbing your book, and I have so many questions. You saw my scribble. I had pages and pages, and so I was going to your service flying in here. I couldn't send the audio to make it done, so I've kind of had to dictate them all. But I'd like to start. You've got a unique background. People that don't know your history, you started out, really wanted to be a great athlete and became one. Didn't make it with the Rams, so you had the kind of determination to give up, so you made it here to the San Diego Chargers and for 4 years. I'd like to start, before we talk about racism, tell me a little bit about your history and to our audience about how you came to connect with the Lord, how you came to be running this amazing church, which, by the way, how many people attend church each week?
There's probably 20,000 to 30,000 over a month's period of time.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And it's diverse.
It's diverse. It's like United Nations here.
Yeah, it really is.
If we go back to my family, I have 2 black grandfathers, a white grandmother, and half Chinese. They're all passed, but half Chinese and black grandmother, all from Jamaica, West Indies.
Wow.
And I grew up in a black neighborhood, went to school in a white neighborhood. And because I'm mixed and have this nice brown cocoa color, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I got harassed in the white neighborhood because I wasn't black. I wasn't white. And I got harassed in the black neighborhood because I wasn't black enough.
They call you whitey there.
Yeah, exactly. So I was kind of between both worlds. My white grandmother, when she was a kid, she was sent to Jamaica, Queens, from Jamaica, West Indies, so she wouldn't marry a black Jamaican. she meets a black Jamaican in Jamaica, and they end up dating and get married. And my grandfather would go to her house. They wouldn't let him in the front door. He had to go to the back. Oh. So when she married him, they cut her off. And even though we lived in Long Island, they lived right in Queens, 15 minutes away, we never knew they existed. Never met them, and it was never even spoken. What
stage of life did you know?
When I was an adult.
Wow.
It was never spoken when I was a kid.
Wow.
But being in a mixed family, we all got along. Grandma was the only white person in our family. Everybody else was brown, but she was just grandma to us. Of course, we knew she was white, but it's like, that's grandma. So I don't understand the problem.
Yeah.
And then playing sports, all sports teams were diverse. I mean, that's probably the one place people learn to get along, because you have a common enemy and a common goal.
Yeah.
And so I had kids on my teams that were white and black. We all got along, but when I went to school, at first to 8th grade in the white school, I got harassed and I came back. And in both those neighborhoods, where I grew up was black and where I went to school was white, they would talk about each other because they didn't know each other. Yeah. They would say, those people. And I said, no, you don't understand. Yeah. That's not how they are.
Yeah.
And so I was always kind of in the middle, dealing with both sides and trying to reconcile the differences. And it was in the 60s, so there was also racial injustice in the 60s and 70s.
Yes.
But then growing up, I got saved and started. I played football at the University of New Haven. got drafted to the Los Angeles Rams at the time in 1982. Got cut, came and played for the San Diego Chargers, which is now the LA Chargers, for 4 years. And my first 2 years, I was doing cocaine and living wild. And these guys shared the gospel with me on the plane, told me Jesus loved me, and I gave my life to Jesus and stopped doing cocaine in one day.
Wow.
And I said, okay, God, what do you want me to do?
How many years ago was that?
That was 1984.
Congratulations, brother.
34 years.
That's
and I stopped
awesome,
cocaine
man.
in one day, and I haven't done it again. And I started a Bible study in my house with kids in my neighborhood, had 9 nationalities. At the time, I didn't grow up. I went to Catholic school, but once I got out of Catholic school in 8th grade, I stopped going to church. So I wasn't a church guy.
Yeah.
And I had 9 nationalities in my house, so I didn't understand what normal church was made of.
Right.
Normal church, 97% of churches are segregated, all white, all black, all Hispanic. We had 9 nationalities in my house. I became a youth pastor, and then in 2000 started The Rock, and it's been diverse since day one.
Wow. It's been a beautiful path, and what I love seeing out there is the diversity. It's a reflection of San Diego, right?
Exactly.
What are the percentages?
Exactly.
It's almost identical, I was reading.
It's almost identical. It fluctuates. The day we did the survey, we had 48% white and 52% everybody else. So, I mean, it just breaks down, from Asian to black to other and Hispanic. But when you look at it, it's just like, and there's so much interracial relationships that you have mixtures of everything. So it's just a beautiful mosaic of the kingdom of God.
A long way from when your grandmother was alive, when that stuff was almost illegal, and your grandfather couldn't along, right?
They got married twice. It was illegal. Wow. It was illegal in certain states, so they had to get married in one state and get married in another state.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into the core of it. You wrote this book. Why? Why did you write this book today? Because I look at the world today, and the reason I want to sit down with you is because I love and respect you. I thought you brought a perspective because you've lived this. You've had both sides of the table, so to speak. And I don't think on the sides of the table. That's how people like to frame it. Right. But you look around today, and racism is still there, but it's also used kind of as a weapon in some cases. And what I loved was you had a different way of looking at things. I always tell people, you take something like even guns. We forget that everybody wants the same thing. They want to have a different answer for it, but some people think you should have guns to protect your children and their family, and some people think you should not have guns to protect them. Right. But now we're in a world where the other side is evil and we don't talk to each other. Even in Congress, it used to be guys would fight like hell during the day and they'd go have a beer together at night and they'd have a conversation and they'd get to some place. But it seems now if you even talk to someone who has a different point of view, they're evil and you're tainted by that as well. And yet we all want the same things. We want our children safe. We want our places of worship safe. We want to go to our restaurants to be safe. So guns are just one example. Right. So tell me, what do you see? How do we get here? What's brought us to this point? And what do you see as the solution?
Right. In every race conversation, it's about us versus them. Those are your two options. And whether it's your culture teaches you that, television teaches you that, you got to pick a side. You feel like you have to pick a side, and people feel trapped because they feel like, well, if I go on this side, I have to be against those people. Whoever those people are, we'll get to it later. The third option, which is the book, is that we honor what we have in common. People have more in common than they have in differences. I mean, both you and I want to have family, we want to be in love, we want to pursue our dreams and our goals, we want to be successful in life, understand what our gifts are.
We have the same DNA practically. You're talking about that in the book too. 99.5% is identical, right?
You and I, 99.5% identical, even though you're a lot bigger than me. We're at 99.5% identical. And even though I'm black and you're white, we're still 99.5% identical. And more importantly, we're made in the image of God, the same God. And that's 100% identical. So we have more in common than we have difference, but the cloud of racism pushes us away from each other, and it creates fear and anger and bitterness towards people, and then we can't see our what we have in common. We focus on our differences. If we can honor, which means put a priceless value on what we have in common and focus on what we have in common. When we were on a football team, people came from all over the country. They had nothing culturally in common. Some people. But once we put the uniform on,
same with my life.
We're on the same team. We got one goal, one enemy. The enemy is not the skin; it's this jersey color, and they are your enemy. And we have one goal. It wasn't like, hey, if he's black, I'm not going to throw the football to him. It wasn't about that. And if we can, as a culture, focus on the things we all want, and the things that we all are, how we all are similar. That's the third option. And so I wrote the book to give people tools, to equip people, to help them understand how is it that I maybe don't honor you? How is it that I'm looking at our differences and not what we have in common? And how can I begin to express honor towards you?
Define racism for us, because you look in the dictionary and racism talks about, prejudging someone, prejudice. Right. That's what prejudging is, right? But usually it's tied to trying to create superiority in types of someone. Right. And I like to, you talked about that in your book. I'm paraphrasing it, but it really touched me. You said it's really, we begin when we no longer honor ourselves, we no longer love ourselves, and we no longer love others, when we forget what the plan is of what life's really about. That's when we start to destroy ourselves. It's like racist to ourselves. How do you define racism, and is it possible for someone to offend someone without meaning to and not be a racist? Because in today's world, that doesn't seem to be so. And if someone did do that, can they be healed? Because today it's like somebody said something, they lose their job. It doesn't just racism, it's sexism, it's misogynist, all the isms, right? And so we live in a world where people live in fear not what to say. And if you don't change what they're thinking, they don't say it. It hasn't changed much anyway. It's just try to control them, which won't long term. So what would be your definition of racism, and what's the move towards solution? I'd love if you talk a little bit about how we group ourselves, the in-group and the out-group. I think that was really useful in your book.
Yeah, first I would say, and when people ever come to this subject, a lot of times they push back because they feel like if I admit to being racially offensive, I am also admitting to being a racist. And so up front, we need to establish that you can be a racially offensive and not be a racist. I'm gonna say that another time because it's very important. I can offend someone racially and not mean it. Not even know I did it. It doesn't make me a racist. Now, you may say it does, but it doesn't make me a racist. Now, of course, there are people who are racist.
Of course, where their intent is to try to harm somebody, or destroy them, or lower their status, or whatever.
Their intent is to put them down, to establish that they are superior simply because of their real ethnicity. There's only one race, the human race. But so racism purely is I am better than you because of my ethnicity. Now, there's three kinds. There's institutional racism, systems. Then there's personally mediated, where it's just me and you. I despise you, I resent you.
And then there's doing it to yourself too,
internalized racism, where I've been told over my life that I'm inferior, and culture tells me I'm inferior. And I believe it. But people first have to accept that they can be racially offensive and not be a racist if they're not. But they have to accept that they can be racially offensive before they can learn. Because in the thousands of conversations I've had, when people can't accept, they can't separate those two things, they will not accept that they're offensive, because if they do, they're accepting they're a racist. And therefore, they will never accept that anything they say is offensive. Therefore, the conversation never happens. That is a big frustration with people of color who are trying to have a conversation. But if people can say, okay, maybe there's something I can learn. Maybe I have a blind spot. We talk about blind spots in the book as well, chapters 5 and 6. That there's things I don't know about how I view myself and how I view others. Because we are made in the image of God, I was created to love you. I was created to see God in you. And when I don't see God in you, when I lower you and dehumanize you, I am living below my God-given design. So that's really on me.
So social scientists has helped us understand this. What is it about the human mind? I don't think it's the human spirit, but the mind that makes us want to be with people we think are like us, and how does that affect the way we look at things that might be creating a blind spot that we don't notice?
Exactly. Sociologists call it grouping. So we're all in groups. Men are a group, pastors are a group, assistant pastors are a group.
Athletes
are a group. Good athletes, bad athletes. Football players are a group. And even your position. So, and when you identify a group, these are people who you have a lot in common with, and you acknowledge what you have in common. So you feel more comfortable with them. You're more patient with them. You're more gracious. You have more positive assumptions about people in your group. But the opposite is true about the people not in your group. You have less positive assumptions. You're less patient. You're less gracious. And if the group happens to be ethnicity, and you are less gracious towards people who are not your ethnic group, that comes off as racism. However, if we could all step back and acknowledge the groups that we're in that have nothing to do with race, and how we give favoritism to the groups we're in, and just apply that to race, apply it to gender.
Give us an example. Give me an example of that.
I walk into a room and there's a bunch of pastors in the room, and we're a mega church, right? So we're a big church. So there's a group of pastors that are big churches, and there's a group of pastors who have small churches. Well, the group of pastors that have big churches have more in common with me. So I may walk over to them, and the group of pastors of the small churches may feel snubbed.
Okay.
Those guys
and
think
that's not the intent.
It's not the
It's
intent.
just you relate to them because you're solving some of the same problems, trying to serve such a large audience of people in a short period of time. And
Exactly. You may talk to a pastor and he has no one on staff.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have an HR director because he has no one to HR.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I get it.
But you go to a senior pastor or a lot of times I'll talk to people in business, and when I tell them we have 200 staff, they all of a sudden go, "Oh, I understand the burdens you have if you have 200 staff, right? Because they have 200 staff. And so now...
But the way it'd be perceived by some people, it's kind of like, if I rub your arm like this, no problem. But if you've got a bunch of sores there, I could touch you with a cat hair and you're going to react.
Exactly.
And it's not just you, it's a set of life experiences.
Exactly.
So you have no bad intent.
Correct.
But in this case, it's not called racist. It'd just be called you're an arrogant son of a...
Exactly.
You weren't being arrogant. You were just trying to relate in some way.
Right. And by the way, it could have been arrogance, but maybe not. Maybe it's just, hey, that's...
Sometimes it is, just like sometimes it is racism.
Yeah, maybe I wanted to go learn from some of the senior pastors, right? So we do that all the time. We gravitate to people we're more comfortable with, the people we're around, but the people who aren't in that group, who may want to be in that group, they want to learn from that group.
Yes.
They might feel they were snubbed. Sometimes, listen, I know that sometimes I thought people were mean towards me because of race. It may not have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
It may have been they had a bad day.
Yeah.
And so, but that creates a blind spot, which is me being unaware of something I'm blind to.
Yes.
I don't even know what I don't know.
Yeah.
And one of the ways to find out your blind spots is to ask. You know, I tell guys, listen, go up to the women in your life, you mentioned women, and ask, do any of them think you're creepy?
The answer is yes. The answer is absolutely yes, in case you don't know. We'll just tell you now.
But I mean...
You don't mean to be creepy, but you are.
And here's how some guys would actually say, what does that even mean? Because they're so creepy, it's so normal to them. But if you ask, now I don't know how many women will be honest, but if you say, look, can you please tell me, is there anything I do that makes you feel uncomfortable? You will learn. And so if you add a friend who's black, Hispanic, white, or whatever, and say, is there anything I do or say that is racially offensive that I don't know?
Yes.
And man, that would break down so many walls with people, because those conversations are very rarely had.
What's also, most people don't want to talk about the subject. They're afraid it'll blow up. They're scared, but being scared is not a reason not to have these conversations, right?
Exactly.
And I think the other part of that is when people get into this conversation, there's so much uncertainty for people. They don't know where to go. So how do you help people find those blind spots besides asking? There's some other ways that you use. You talked in the book about a woman who was a good friend of yours, a white woman, and she was saying to you, why don't you just get over this? Right? Will you share what you did?
Yeah, well, one of the, and I've been told that many, many times, just get over it. And I challenged 6 white people including this person, to go someplace where they would be the only white person. Yeah. Because we were talking about being in a culture that is right-handed, and we could talk about that.
That's a good example.
Be right-handed. And let me go.
You're left-handed, right?
I'm
We'll start with that. That's a good one. Yeah.
I'm left-handed, and the culture's made for right-handed people.
Yes.
And
so it's like right-handed privilege.
Right. So your desk in school is right-handed.
Yes.
But I'm left-handed, so I couldn't put my elbow on the desk.
Yeah.
Or if I want to get golf clubs that are left-handed, I have to go to 3 extra stores than a right-handed.
Yeah.
And if I want to go a catcher's mitt, try to get a left-handed catcher's mitt for a Little League. You have to go to, now you can go to Amazon, but when we were kids, the only Amazon was in the jungle, right? So, but people who are right-handed don't understand the advantage of being right-handed, because it's how culture was made.
And they're not, and the right-handed people are not bad people. Right?
Exactly.
It's just like because someone's a color or a background or a religion or whatever the case may be, it doesn't make them bad, but they have some advantages in some cultures, right? In this case, right-handed for sure.
And I was talking to this person about that. She said, can you get over it? And I said, well, look, you need to go someplace where you can be the only left-handed person.
Yeah.
And when you're in your out group, when you're not around people who are like you ethnically, and you're the only one, you start to think things different than when you're around everybody who looks like you. Yeah. Because you can just sense that I'm not going to get the benefit, I may not get the benefit of the doubt that I would if everybody was like me.
Yes.
I may not get the grace and the patience, and I may not have positive assumptions made about me as if I would if I was around people who are like me.
Yes.
That's what a lot of people of color live every day.
Yeah.
And so it was really a chance to kind of understand what you didn't understand, what people don't understand.
Yeah.
And one of the guys I asked, he said, I'm not going to do it. He wouldn't go someplace where he was the only white person. And he said, and I had him write down why. And he wrote 2 paragraphs that are in the book, and he talked about I wouldn't even go to a black church. I would feel uncomfortable. Wow. And the sad thing about that is the perception that means about what he thinks about that environment, about black believers, Christians. Wow. That was just really sad. And he's a Christian. And so when you can realize that's what I believe, then you could stop and say, man, maybe I didn't realize the fear, the bias, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. You know, the thing about this book that I want to make clear is that it's not about not being racist. It's about how to be honoring.
Yes.
You know, because a lot of times people feel like I have to admit I'm a racist and I'm a bad person in order for me to get better. Well, if you just start honoring, then it takes care of itself. Yeah. And if I could see you and say, you know what, I used to have assumptions about someone who looked like you, and maybe I used to not say I didn't see your color, which is another thing we could talk about. Yeah. I'm just going to start honoring you, and I'm going to get to know you, and I want to listen to your story. Yeah. Then a lot of that negativity goes away.
I think we should mention that too, because you mentioned something really important that you talked about in the book. You and I talked about it privately. To say you don't see color is just not true. Yeah. And so it's people trying to say, look, I hold you equal to me, or I hold you as a friend, or hold you whatever. But to not say that, it's offensive because it makes people believe what? It makes them believe that I can't possibly understand all that you've gone through. What makes somebody offended in that area? Because many people don't, white people, for example, don't understand that.
Right. When your color carries a burden with it, and it has a different experience with it. Because I remember I was 25 or 20-something years old when the first time I heard someone say that to me. Yeah. And I didn't understand. I thought it meant they didn't see blue, yellow, or red. And I was like, man, that's messed up. You don't see blue, yellow, red. They said,
no, gray world. Huh?
Yeah, everything's gray. They said, no, I don't see your color. And I was like, did that? I didn't know what that meant because I knew that's not what I knew that wasn't real. Yeah. So I was like, did you make me like you? And in a sense,
I want to be me still.
Right, because I want to be me. Yeah. But what it does is it eliminates everything that came along with this color.
Yes.
Good, bad, and indifferent.
Yeah.
All positive and negative.
Yeah.
And that's insulting versus saying, no, I see you and I honor, I place value on how God made you. Because God made this. God made that.
Yes.
And white's a color as well. In our culture, we say white people and people of color. Those are your 2 options. Yeah. The third option is that we're all colored.
Yeah, that's
right. If you go in the Webster's Dictionary all the way to the back, by the W's, it says white is a color.
you gave an example from Sanford and Sons. That was a cool example. You showed that was funny about that.
Red Fox was robbed in the store, in the show, and the white cop and the black cop always came to his house. And the white cop said, so, Mr. Sanford, was the perpetrator colored? And he said, yeah, he was colored white. and it's so profound because we don't say that.
Yeah.
You know, and he kind of even went further in another episode where he talked about white people, when they get embarrassed, they turn red. When they get cold, they get blue. And and they call us colored, right?
That's right.
But yeah, everybody's got color. And when you get a tan,
which is ironic because most white people want to get brown. Right? It's just what's wrong with our culture that we don't value it.
I know.
It's so silly.
You value the tan in Hawaii, Hawaii, but you don't value the tan in the womb that you get in the womb. But here's the thing: is that God made all that, and God made the ability for our skin to change, all of our skin. Yeah. And for all of us get a tan. We all have the ability to get darker from the sun. And that's the beauty of God's creation, and we just want to dumb it down, and say no. Let's honor it and celebrate.
And also, I think you can't honor something you don't appreciate or you don't even understand. So I'm hoping, I think in the audience of people we have a lot of people out there that are hungry. They're hungry to grow. They're hungry to give. They're hungry to step their game up. They're hungry to connect at a deeper level with everyone that they possibly can. And I hope they'll take you up on your offer because I always tell people a belief is a poor substitute for an experience. Mm-hmm. And so I can't possibly know what it's like to be African American, but I can get a little bit of feeling if I step in your shoes, and the only step in your shoes is experiential, not just in my head, right? And so I've had those experiences. I had the same experience you growing up in sports, and I grew up in a poor community that was very integrated because that's just the way it was. But in sports, there was not even a single thought about this. But I can remember I had an experience, I worked with Tukey Williams, I don't remember the head of the Crips, and he got locked up. And, here's a man who came from a really tough environment and learned to use unbelievable force and intensity to basically be able to survive, built the Crips, got thrown in jail. And I spent a lot of time with him because I saw a film on his life. And it just struck me, this woman who came to do a story on him, and she didn't want her son to be like him. And so she was in an attack mode. And he goes, you haven't even asked me any questions about who I really am.
Right.
And when he came in, San Quentin, he took over the place. But after 3 or 4 years, he was reading and feeding his mind, and he changed and transformed. And he was the first person to get Crips and Bloods together through a videotape and say, we got to end this war. Wow. He wrote all these articles. He actually was nominated 3 times for a Nobel Prize, and I was trying to save his life because Schwarzenegger was the governor then. So anyway, I spent time with him and I thought we convinced the governor and gave him 100,000 names, 100,000 emails from principals and people saying, we're not saying let him loose. If you think he did this, just let him live his life because he's doing good work. And unfortunately, you get those same stereotypes. I'm hard on crime or not hard on crime.
Right.
And so the governor said to me, you're going to still want, he lives in Sun Valley some of the time, you're going to still want me to come to your house and use your hot pools and eat your ice cream. And so I thought, oh man, he's free. And they killed him. But he asked me to speak at his funeral. And so I went down into the middle of the Crips and Bloods. I was the only white person in this place. There were more police officers than you could ever dream of down the side trying to keep this thing from breaking out. I followed Louis Farrakhan as the speaker. Right. And they looked at me, and the only other white person was my wife up at the top there, and she was a little concerned, I gotta tell you. So I felt those feelings, but I spoke the unspokens, and I said, listen, you're probably wondering why this freaking white man is standing here in this environment. But it said, but Tukey, the man who just passed away, is not the man he started as. And he wanted me to share with you that color isn't what matters. It's the soul, right? It's what we're here to give, what we're here to do. But I can remember in the midst of that, walking out of there going, oh my God, am I going to get out of this thing alive? And I never had that thought before. And it made me stop and just think about exactly what you said. Like, what's it like for an African-American person to walk in this all-white environment? And that's most of their life. You look at somebody like LeBron, one of the most incredible athletes, and yet he's still dealing with that.
Right.
So how the honoring is the secret, and it's not everyone's a Christian, and they may not all relate to that exact formula, but tell me, how do we really turn the corner in a world where so much is focused on the problem and not on the solution? What do you think is the best way to move people forward?
I think one way is to relabel people. When I see you, you're not, even though I see that you're white, you're not the white man.
Yeah.
You're
not all white people are the same.
Right, exactly.
Men.
I have to relabel you as my brother, my sister, or my neighbor. The greatest commandment, which I think everybody would understand, is the golden rule. It's the same thing: is to love your neighbor as yourself, or treat people how you want to be treated. So to love your neighbors as yourself. If I relabel you as something less than neighbor and dehumanize you, I don't need to love you. So when we look on the news and we see the athlete, the spoil, if you label the athlete protesting the spoiled black athlete, or the immigrant, or the white supremacist, and you label them something that dehumanizes them, you give yourself permission to hate them. You give yourself permission to marginalize them. I remember when I was watching the Cowboys and Indians when I was a little kid, and I always wanted to learn about the Indians because they didn't have saddles. They were brown like me. The little girls had long black hair like my mom. Right? So, but they were savages. They weren't people.
Interesting.
And so when you relabel people, you give yourself permission to allow them to be mistreated less than you would accept for yourself. And so if we went around and just looked on television, listen, you may, the people coming across the border, there's a lot of politics there and there's a lot of complications of immigration. I get all that. However, we have to start with that they're humans. We can't start with that they're less than, because that's what they are. They were made in the image of God as the same as I was.
And that's what happens in every war. The Japs, all the terms that are given to someone to separate them, to make them less than, so that someone can justify killing somebody for the most part.
And we justify mistreating them. And so if we can start with humanizing people and giving them, next, if we can have a race consultation when we speak to them. In other words, when I'm talking to you, I know I'm talking to a white man. You're white. I see that. God gave me eyes and a brain to process information and visual. That's not bad. If I turn that into a bad thing, that's on me. But I need to allow you to disclose to me who you are. It's like the guy in the Crips, right? You saw him and you allowed him to disclose to you his genius, right? And hear his story, and you were able to filter his experience and his intelligence and put it in and say, okay, now I see why he did that, but he has the potential to do that.
And who he is today, too, because I think what happens today is we lock people in a moment of time as a tool for control, power.
Yes. No one has a corner market on racism. It's sin, right? So we all do it.
Or some other ism, at least.
It's right, it's right. And so if you allow people to self-disclose, if I approach you and say there is something ingenious in him, without even knowing who you are, right? There's something ingenious. If I see someone at the airport, I talk to all the sky caps at the airport and all the TSA people, and and I know that every single person, there's something ingenious in them. I want to know what that is. Tell me your story, your pain. What are your dreams? Tell me about your family. And there's a gem there. Now, if people want to talk, you'll discover something amazing.
If you're looking for it.
If you're looking for it, you have to look for it, and you have to give them the
But if
chance.
you're looking for what's wrong is always available, so is what's right, right?
And we all have a social narrative. A social narrative is a story that, it's a story that shapes how you see the world. It's what your parents told you, your neighborhood, your friends, and your social narrative created the prescription of the glasses through which you see everything. You're one of 6-7 billion people. So you have 1/6 billionth of the truth, of a perspective. My brothers and I have 2 brothers. We slept in the same room growing up. We have different social narrative. We have the same parents, same house, same street, same friends, same school at the same time. But yet we had a little different experience because we're different people. And so all of our social narratives has a perspective. And that perspective has blind spots because it's limited. And so we have to allow other people to disclose to us who they really are versus us imposing on them our assumptions and not letting them disclose.
So then it becomes self-fulfilling, and I do seminars with people, even a huge group, and I'll do a little exercise with them for 2 seconds. I'll say, I want you all look around the room, I'm going to give you a test. I want you to look around there and see everything you see is brown. Brown clothing, brown people, brown things, brown anything. Look for it. Okay, close your eyes. Now tell me everything you just saw that was red. Right? And they all giggle for a moment. Then I say, open your eyes, look for red. And they all look for red. Okay, how many found more red this time? Everybody did. How come? Because you get what you look for, right? Seek and you shall find, right? But then I said, you'll seek and you shall find even if it's not there. How many saw burgundy and called it red just so you could count more numbers? Everybody laughs and raises their hand. So it's like we get what we look for. So that narrative is so critical. And that narrative isn't really being directed very much by individuals who are looking from a place of connection. It's more from a place of separation at this stage. So, but tell me, but there are people that have grown up with the most insane injustices. They've grown up with every ism, whether it be misogynist, whether it be racism, whether it be class distinctions based on finance, whether it's body morph situations, if somebody's bigger physically or heavier, whatever the case would be, and everybody looks at them a certain way, acts, not everybody, but enough that that's what they believe, that becomes their narrative. And yet then there's the Oprahs. There's the Quincy Jones. He's 85 years old. He's worked with everybody on earth, white, black, purple, everything in between. You look at Jay-Z or you look at Beyonce. They're just royalty in our country, in our world now. Or you look around and there's one stage when the greatest golfer in the world was black and the best rapper people claimed was white, at least by awards, right? Eminem. So it's like, even though the story is there are these people that seem to be able to break out of it. What do they have different? Do they develop a story that says, I don't care what the environment does, I'm going to create life on my terms and add value and change? What is it do you perceive that they have that allow them to break out of all the isms and all the limitations that are legitimately there, but it didn't stop them? Why?
Yeah, I think every one of their stories is different.
Yes.
And as you know, anybody successful is put in time and work. And there are a lot of people where the stars align and things happen. And so for each one of those people, I couldn't tell you. However, I would say this. Every man is made in the image of God, and every man has that capacity for way more than we can ask or imagine. And certain people just happen to be able to tap into the greatness that God has put in them and the ability, and they match up their gifts, their calling, their talent, and their drive, and they just won't take no for an answer.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying?
And they usually have something they're trying to serve more than themselves. Even if it's an athlete, he's trying to serve something large and build something more than himself. And it feels like to me, I don't know what your experience is, if it's the same, it's like God moves to those that are trying to serve more than just themselves. Like we're just trying to serve ourselves. We get a certain amount of insight, I think, because life supports life. We're all part of life. If you're trying to support your family, you get a different level of insight. You're trying to support a giant community like you do, you get a different level of insight. You're trying to do something for the world, whether anybody knows it or not, you know it's right, and you get a different level of insight. So it's like, Where have your insights come from most? Where have you gotten the insights that have allowed you to navigate through all these challenges to a place where you're able to serve so many?
When I was leading up to the age of 24, I was living for me. Football was my God. Getting high was my God. And then when these guys shared the gospel with me, that Jesus died for my sin and rose from the dead, and not that I was going to join a religion, but that I was going to have a relationship with God. Because God made us in his image so we can have a relationship. And in the context of that relationship, with the Spirit of God living in me, that God can actually express himself through me was so much different than religion, where I got to go check the box.
Right.
And the boxes I check are better than the boxes that you check. Yeah. And then God says, no, I'm not about checking a box. I'm about a relationship. So at the age of 24, when I gave my life to Jesus Christ, I stopped doing cocaine, and one day, April 12th, 1984, stopped smoking weed that day. My girlfriend and I got back together that day.
She's your wife today.
She is my wife today.
How many years later now?
34 years.
Good you know the number, because she's watching. She's watching right
34,
now.
34 years, September 11th. And we met 38 years ago. We met in 1980. Wow. But what happened was I said to God, I can't do this for me anymore. I have to do it for you.
Yeah.
And so when the Spirit of God started speaking to me, and then when this book came out, even for years, whenever there was an incident in the country that was very racial, like when OJ was acquitted, and all of the white people were mad and all the black people were happy. And I saw that. It just broke my heart, the division. Yeah. I remember that weekend I spoke at the church I was at, and I cried after it was over, because it was just so heartbreaking to see how divided we were.
But that's really culture, right? It's not humanity. It's what we've been. You don't grow up being you don't come into the world being a racist, right? You learn.
You learn from the pain of your family. Remember, social narrative. Everybody watching here, you sat around your table, and you listened to your parents, your grandparents tell their story. Yes. You listened to your friends tell their story, and you took it as fact. Now, my family had stories that was fact. It just wasn't the whole story, but it was fact. Yeah. And so that's all you know. Yeah. And so, we grew up hearing the same perpetuated stories of our families and the pain perspective of our families.
And when you're in our in-group, the people that are like you, you give people a different set of characteristics and qualities. And when they're outside the group, it's magnified. The pain is magnified. There might be problems within the in-group even, but people look at it differently. It's like even couples. You wrote about this actually, if I remember correctly. In a relationship, you see people, and the ones that get divorced are the ones always that say, "I gave my all. I gave them everything." They give so much value to what they gave, and they don't see the value that was given back to them, right? And that's why they end up divorced. Well, we're kind of like experiencing that at a cultural level right now, because we're forgetting the gifts that we are giving each other, or at least capable of giving each other.
And that example is that the marriage was a contract, not a covenant. So if I make a covenant with you, I am committing to you, period.
See, I'm loving you no matter what.
I'm loving you no matter what. If I make a contract, you do this, I'll do this.
Yeah, that's right. It's a deal.
It's a deal. It's a deal. That's right. It's a deal. It's a deal. You negotiate, right? And so most marriages are contracts. They're not covenants. And so we have
great distinction.
And we don't have covenants with people. I need to make a covenant with you. I'm gonna love you, even if you curse my name. I'm gonna love you. That's what really love is, right?
Yeah.
How
do you get people to the point where they make the distinction of that? Because like a relationship that's transactional doesn't feel very good to anybody, right? On either side. When a relationship is based purely on love and it's unconditional love, it's one of the greatest experiences in life. I'm privileged to have that. I know you are as well. Right. How do you get people to a point of covenant in their mindset as opposed to contract?
Yeah. For me, I had to get my mindset off me. And when God got into my life and God said, "I made a covenant with you," because you have nothing to offer me. I mean, it's not like I went to God and said, "God, look at let's make a deal." And he's like, "No.
You were saying today in the service, he was saying today, there's nothing God, one thing God can't do. He's not going to learn from you.
He's not learning anything. He's not learning anything. So God said, my son died. He already did it. We paid the whole price. You didn't do anything. Yeah. So I just want you to receive my love. And I was like, okay, God. And so once I realized how much God loved me unconditionally, because I didn't deserve it, don't deserve it, he said, now I want you to do that. Yeah. And so if I can learn how to unconditionally love other people, and by the way, the more I love people who don't love me, the more I'm like Jesus. Yeah. And so that's the in the purest sense, I have to learn unconditional love. And whoever's watching, you can't love and treat people right because they do it to you. That's a contract.
Yeah.
You have to decide, I am going to be the beginning and the end of the grace in this conversation, no matter what happens, because grace is undeserved. Once you have to deserve it, it's not grace anymore. It's not really love anymore.
Tell me, it's easy to talk about these things, philosophically, but one of the reasons I respect you, Miles, is you live this stuff, you walk your talk. And I know there was an experience here in San Diego where there was an immigrant man who's from Africa, if I remember correctly, I think Uganda, and he was shot by the police. And so now you're dealing with an issue where the culture says, pick a side, and you were brought in as amongst a group of people. I know that was a hard situation, but what I loved was tell people the situation and tell them about the 5 chairs and how you dealt with it, because brother, that was exquisite.
So it happened on a Tuesday. It was a Monday or Tuesday because we had our pastors meeting on Wednesday. It happened on a Monday, Tuesday, and the video came out of the police officer shooting this African immigrant here in town.
Which, by the way, you'd think the video would clear it up, but whatever people believe, if they see it in the video still, don't they, on all sides?
Everyone saw it the way they wanted to see it. And so I went to the police station that night, and when a video came out, and we talked to the chief about going outside to talk to the protesters. So I went outside to talk to he went outside, and we went with him. I was standing next to him, and while he's reading his statement, there were about 100 protesters, and it was at night, so you really couldn't see a lot of people because there were a lot of lights, and someone cursed me. No, they said
first the church.
The church. They blankety blank the church.
Rock Church.
And I was like, my head just jerked up. Like, wow, we didn't. How did we get in this?
Yeah.
And then they said blankety blank Pastor Miles.
Yeah.
And it really bothered me. And then, so that was on Tuesday. I went to staff meeting the next day, and in our staff we have black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Middle Eastern, all these different ethnicities in our pastoral staff.
Yes.
There's 30 pastors in the room. So we got in a discussion. I said, look, we got to talk about this because I got to address this Sunday. I could easily say, hey, let's pray for the city, but we just kind of going deep a little bit. So we had a discussion. I'm thinking, man, if we were divided in that room, because there was an ex-cop in that room, there was a pastor whose brother was working SWAT in the protest that week.
Wow.
And then there were African-American guys who got to tell their kids how to respond when the cop stops them.
Yeah.
So we were all having this discussion in our pastoral staff. So that Sunday, I said, I got to...
So in your own staff, you had all these different points of view there, even amongst your team.
Right, and I'm thinking, these are only 30. Wow. We're going to have,
your
thousands, right? And so God gave me this vision of this table with 5 chairs, and one chair represented the police officer. One chair represented the people who thought the shooting was justified, which some did in the room. Another chair represented the people who thought the shooting was unjustified. And then there was another chair that represented the devil that said, you got to pick one or the other. And that's where the culture...
That's where everyone gets divided. That's where all the pain comes from.
You got to pick a side. And then the other chair said, I have a third option. That was God's chair. And it's how do you... And the big question that night was...
So how did you use each chair? Tell people, because I thought it was brilliant.
Well, I said some of you in here... Well, so here's a police...
You stood behind the police chair, right?
And my father was a cop. My son's a cop.
Wow.
And now my father arrested cops as a cop.
Wow.
So cops are human.
Yeah.
They have an incredible, hard, difficult job, but they're human.
Yeah.
And they do a superhuman job. When you pick a side from in-group, out-group, once you pick a side, you, by cultural standards, can never agree with the other side. So if you're a Republican, you can't agree with a Democrat. If you're a Democrat, you can't agree with a Republican, even if they have a great idea.
It used to be, but not anymore.
Right.
We're so polarized.
We're so polarized. So if you are someone who sides with the police, you find yourself in a position where you always have to side with police and never look and never be able to accept that maybe sometimes they're wrong. Yeah. If you side against the police, it's the same thing. Yeah. And that's the problem with the culture. And so I stood behind the police and said, look, I believe most police are great servants and they do a great job, and there's some who do make mistakes or are malicious.
Yeah, most for sure.
Then there are some people who believe that the shooting was justified.
You stood behind that chair.
They were behind that chair. And you know what? I can't, okay, I get it. I understand how you can think that.
Because the way he provoked the officers, what they were suggesting then.
Based on the video. Yeah. Then there were some people who said it wasn't justified. I get that as well, because I saw the video myself.
Yeah.
The problem is, what is your heart towards the people who disagree with you?
That's the key.
That's
the reason I want to do this whole conversation, because I think if that doesn't change, all the conversation is not going to change anything. The idea of demonization, you took that away by acknowledging all the points of view, and then you ended with a final chair.
The final chair is that there's a third option. and that you can love the person who disagrees with you, because we all have a different perspective. Here's the cool thing about it. We did prayer at the altar at the end,
best part of the story.
And I'm shaking people's hands, and this guy grabs my hand, he pulls me towards him, and he says, I was the guy who yelled at you. Oh! So I asked him to come in the back after and videotape.
And after you're done beating him, what happened?
Well, he has mother with him, so I couldn't beat him. But him and his mom, I was so relieved, because I was
being the pastor that you are.
It bothered me. It bothered me that he said that, and he came in the back and apologized in front of his mom. And his mom was like, "What did you say?" And he said, "I didn't think Pastor Miles cared." And his mom said, "What are you talking about? He's been talking about the shootings." There were a lot of shootings in a row at that time. In Dallas and here in Louisiana, and his mom was saying he's been putting the people's names on the pictures on the screen, the people, and the kid said, "I wasn't there at church." It's like, that doesn't mean that doesn't mean I didn't do it. Yeah. And so, but it really gave me hope, because he heard the full picture of how to love people who don't believe what you believe. Yeah. And that is a lot.
It doesn't make them evil.
Doesn't make it evil. There's a bigger picture to all of this. Yeah. And he admitted that on video. It was great.
Today, there's a tendency, and you see this, a lot of social scientists are describing this, on at least the extreme coast, not in the middle of the country, where the people look for racism, sexism, homophobic, Islam, any type of phobia or ism, and they assume the worst in somebody, where intent doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the intent was. You feel differently about that when I read, but the intent does matter, doesn't it?
Right. They assume they're imposing their social narrative on.
Yes, their story.
Their story. So if I assume white people are evil,
all white people.
Right. So I come into this conversation, and if I assume that, I now have to prove that about you. Yeah. And I'm gonna look for any reason to justify that. Yeah. And I'm bringing my assumption, versus allowing you as an individual to disclose yourself to me. Now, I may have been treated by a bad by a person, but for you, I don't know you. Yeah. So I don't want to impose that on you. That's
somebody could treat you poorly, and it may not be based on sex or gender. It may just be either a jerk in the moment, or they have some personality conflict with you. But we tend to jump to that situation. How do we balance that out? Because it is reinforced now.
Right. You know, it's a cool thing that I have so many white supremacists, former white supremacists, that are my close friends.
Oh, that's awesome.
And when you
whose DNA is probably 20% African American.
Exactly.
You know, I've had some guys like that. You know, they look and find out this. They don't. How do they deal with that when they find out they've got African American in them in a significant portion?
Chapter 1 of this book.
You mentioned a guy 14% or something.
14%. He was a white supremacist Klansman, I think it was, 14% black.
Yeah.
Oops.
And how did he deal with that?
He denied the science.
Oh, of course.
Right.
Of course.
But when I look at the people who are like that and realize people change, and realize there's something more to, there's something in there deeper than your hate. Yeah. And I'm challenged to get to that. Yeah. And I'm challenged to discover that. If we can give people the benefit of the doubt and say, no, there's something, they were made to love like I was made to love, like God was made to love. Let me go after that.
So often when you find their histories in it, because I deal with this like you do in the work I do, I always know that you can't influence somebody if you're judging them. I mean, maybe you can, but not consistently and not at a higher level. And so very often these judgments are made, and then it becomes self-fulfilling. It's like, if you're talking with somebody and you believe they're your friend, and they treat you really bad one day, you don't think they're a racist, they're sexist, anything else. You think if you can't resolve it, they're having a bad day, because you know they're a good person. That's your identity for them. But if you think they're manipulating whatever, then the first question, if they start treating you good, you're like, what do they want?
Yeah, exactly.
So we aren't actually controlled by the real experience of life. We're controlled by the beliefs we have about ourselves and other people. And that's really what this is all about.
And that's when I go back to labeling. If I label you a criminal, I can no longer relate to you as a human. Yeah. I can only see you as a criminal. Yeah. And you go back to parenting. If you call your kid stupid, you just dehumanize your son, your daughter, and now you can't relate to them as your child, as your son, your beloved son, daughter.
And that same thing's happening, though. Now people are putting those names on them, the isms on people, and making it a permanent situation. One of the beautiful parts about this third option is by honoring people, by seeing the highest part of them, sometimes seeing more than they even see in themselves, you give people the room for that growth. And it's not just growth in terms of business or life or whatever. It's moral growth, it's spiritual growth, it's the growth of love in their heart that can change the world. And it's hard to do that when those labels get tighter and tighter and tighter. So what do you really hope comes out of the book? Why did you write it? What's the real goal? What do you want people to take away?
My hope that people would be set free to love people who are different. And in doing that, people are going to realize, I didn't realize I had this bias. I didn't realize I had this prejudice. I didn't realize I was cutting people off. I didn't realize I was making these assumptions about people without demonizing people, setting people free to actually be what God created them to be and actually enjoy the relationships that they are being cheated out of.
Yeah.
I mean, black people are fabulous. Latinos are fabulous. White people are fabulous. Asian people are fabulous. I mean, I can go around 190-something countries, right? Everybody's fabulous. They really are. Because God didn't make mistakes. He didn't say, I'll make these good and these bad. People are fabulous, and then but when we put them in these little labels, we stamp mediocrity on them. And we stamp inferior on them, and now we ruin the relationship.
And we imprison ourselves because we really can't grow as well.
Right.
Give me, you talk about 4 steps that people can take. You mentioned one of them already, and I really touched because brother is part of my lexicon with human beings, is why I have a connection. I love people, a sister. What are the 4 things that you talk about as practical steps that if I'm back here at home and going, okay, guys, Christian or not Christian, because there's many different religions walking and people that aren't religious, but I care about human beings and I want to be part of this. I want to be part of the solution. How do we be part of the solution? Because we covered a lot of area, but let's maybe
4 very simple things. Number 1, relabel everybody as your neighbor.
Or your brother or your sister.
Or your brother, sister, same thing. That person is equal to me. But you have to. But if you say that's my brother, that's my sister, and remember that means that they're equal to you.
And not just saying that verbally, but actually taking that in your heart so that it guides the way you think about them and yourself.
And then you can filter your assumptions through that label.
And brothers and sisters fight at times. Brothers have different points of view. They get pissed off.
But at the end of the day,
exactly.
I would say have a race consultation. Let people self-disclose to you. I want to learn the greatness in you. There's something amazing about you.
Look for it.
Look for it. You have to look for it. See people's color.
Yeah, don't say there's no color.
Correct. Like, see people for what they are.
Yeah.
You know, I want to know where you're from. Tell me your history. I want to know your ethnicity. I want to know your culture. What you've been through. Tell me about your culture.
Yeah.
And then I would say acknowledge that you have a blind spot. Acknowledge that you don't know everything. Allow yourself
Don't be afraid if it means something bad when it's part of the learning process.
Right.
We're all conditioned.
Exactly. We can all fail without being a failure. We can all lose without being a loser. So if I failed in being offensive, doesn't mean I'm a failure.
Right.
If I've been racially offensive, doesn't make me a racist necessarily.
Yeah.
I got to own it and grow.
Yeah. Can people can find a way to be offended also, though, no matter what you do, if they want to be, can they not?
Correct.
I mean, anyone. I'm not just talking about racism. I mean, any.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's on the receiving end, that I have to give people grace and not assume that they meant to hurt me.
Yes.
Or not assume they meant to hurt me because of a reason that I think.
Yes.
And even more importantly, not assume that that's the way they always will be.
I think that's the most important one. You know, so often, too, the people that are truly racist, they're trying to harm somebody.
Right.
The people that are the most aggressive harming others were often harmed by others before them. I mean, I know almost anybody I've ever dug in that area, the most mean, horrific human beings, really underneath it, there's an enormous amount of pain. And so, unfortunately, is that your experience? Those who have been hurt often hurt others, unfortunately. Not all, fortunately.
Exactly. Hurt people. And here's the thing, you can't pull, when you're being a racist, you're trying to pull somebody down.
Yeah.
But you can't pull somebody down unless you feel below them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so those people are
that's really beautiful.
It's their insecurity.
Hope you all heard that one. That was a good one. Say that one again.
You can't pull somebody down unless you feel below them.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
You know,
that's a good thing to remember if someone's judging you too. You have to remind yourself. Right?
Totally.
You see a typical racist guy, like a white supremacist I dealt with once. His father beat him. He hated his father. He hated his life. He hated everything. So of course he hated somebody else and looked for something to do. You know, that's just how it goes.
Matter of fact, I was in the prison in juvenile hall talking to a white supremacist teenager, and his father beat him.
It's common, unfortunately. It's really common. And you know, you see those guys in prison, and there's nothing but hate in those environments because they're in an inhuman place as well.
Right.
Tell me about prison reform. How does this relate in a prison? That's a good question. It's one of the things that is on the docket. I'm hoping Republicans and Democrats, as an independent, will do something. It's so unjust and insane right now. What do you see happening in that area? What would you hope would happen in that area?
Two things. One, that the people who are in charge of prison reform would see the prisoners as humans.
Yeah.
And be able to accept that the dehumanizing treatment that they receive is dehumanizing.
Yeah.
And it's not making them any better. It's not honoring the people as humans. Yeah. And see them as people that can grow into something positive. Yeah. On the inside of the prison, if guys get the book, that they would also see themselves as how God sees them and not how they've been told all their life. Because when you're told all your life, you're never going to be anything, you're not but a thug, you're not but this, you believe it.
Yeah. So one final piece that I was touched by, I think I saw it in an interview, I don't think I read it in the book. You told the story of Rod Carew, and you'll have to explain who Rod Carew is because I saw you trying to share it with people, and you and I are old enough to know who Rod Carew is. But tell Rod Carew is and share that story about the heart. I was really touched by it.
Yeah, Rod Carew was 18-time All-Star. He's 73, 74 now, give or take.
3,000 plus hits.
3,000 plus hits in Major League Baseball. 18-time All-Star, Rookie of the Year, MVP, Hall of Famer, obviously. And he had a heart condition at 71 and needed a heart transplant and kidney transplant. At the same time, at 20.
And his ethnicity, so they know?
So he's right. He's a black Panamanian. I say black. He's a little darker than me, Panamanian.
Yeah.
And a 27-year-old white NFL player at the same time went into a coma, Conrad Rulin, and he had a brain aneurysm. And his mom went to the hospital while he was in this coma, put her head on his chest, and was just praying, you know, you're going to live. This is not the end of your life. And she's listened to his heartbeat. He died.
He met Rod Carew, correct?
He met, when he was 11, he met Rod Carew and came home and told his mom, I'm going to be a pro athlete. Wow. I met my hero.
Wow.
And he had donated his organs so signed him over to be donated. And Rod Carew got his heart and kidney. So his mom calls up Rod Carew and says, you have my son's heart and kidney. And she says, well, would you like to come listen to your son's heart? So she goes over his house and listens to his son's heart.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know, if we're so different, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You know, we're so genetically identical that it's not about, you know, your ethnicities, you know, blood type maybe, but, you know, God made us to be interchangeable.
Yeah.
And he said, you guys are making a big deal about nothing.
Wow, that's a beautiful example. I think I'm hoping that people will be touched by this experience and that they'll think about things in a different way. I mean, it doesn't take a lot. So as a practical way to spread this, you know, we're having this conversation. Some people are going to watch this. Hopefully they'll pass this on. They'll be moved by it. But you've got a great quick option that could really help spread the word and maybe change the tide of momentum. And I understand that you call it the third option challenge, to love someone who doesn't look like you. Tell us about that.
Very simple. You say, hey, I'm Miley Fearson, and I accept the third option challenge to love somebody who doesn't look like me. And I want to love Tony Robbins and tell you I love you. And what I appreciate about you is you are so sincere and such a sincere friend. I know we don't see each other all the time, but you are so sincere, and thank you for coming here and talking about the book.
Miles, you walk your talk. You're a beautiful soul, amazing pastor, and amazing church. But I really want to recommend everybody pick up the book, The Third Option, Hope for a Racially Divided Nation, maybe radically divided as well, nation on this issue. Miles, it's awesome to be with you.
God bless you. God bless you.
The Tony Robbins podcast is directed by Tony Robbins and hosted by Tony Robbins and Mary Buckheit. Anna York is the executive producer and steps in as occasional host. Digital editing by Jamie Carvajal and Adriel De La Torre. Copyright Robbins Research International.